Riven stared at the swirling mess on her lab console, a grim reminder that the universe loved a good joke at her expense. Ah, the joys of being a geneticist in a Martian basement, she muttered, scraping the remains of what was supposed to be a revolutionary genetic sequence off the screen. It's almost like the universe is saying screw you in binary. Jax, her partner in crime, or rather in the daily grind of watching molecules misbehave, sauntered in, covered in Martian dust like some low-budget hero emerging from a sandstorm. "Got more dirt samples for you, Doc," he quipped, dropping a container onto the cluttered desk. "Or as I like to call them, Martian gold." Riven snorted. "If only we could trade them for a ticket off this rock," she said, giving the container a skeptical glance. "I hear Earth's got running water and everything." "Yeah, but I've grown fond of the ambience here. You know, the constant threat of suffocation and the charming red landscape," Jax replied, leaning against the wall, which promptly groaned under his weight. "Besides, where else can you dig a hole and discover absolutely nothing of value?" "True," Riven agreed, rolling her eyes. "Mars, where dreams go to die and geneticists try not to kill themselves out of sheer boredom." The lab was a maze of blinking lights and haphazardly strewn equipment, the kind of place that would give a health inspector nightmares. But here, beneath the surface of Mars, they were safe from prying eyes. Or so they thought. Jax rummaged through a pile of cables, unearthing an old holovid screen. "Found this beauty in the scrap pile," he announced, holding it up like a trophy. Riven raised an eyebrow. "Oh great, something else to draw power from our barely functional grid." Jax grinned, unfazed. "Nah, it's just for a bit of nostalgia. I figured we could use it to watch old Earth comedies. A little reminder of how life used to be before we decided to come play pioneers. I'm sure watching people enjoy breathable air and green grass will be just the morale boost we need," Riven deadpanned. Despite their banter, there was an unspoken camaraderie between them, a shared understanding that came from being two of the few who dared to call this grimy underground colony home. The others, the ones who hadn't yet lost their minds or died of ennui, kept mostly to themselves. Their conversation was interrupted by an alert from Riven's console. "Oh look, another mystery blip on the radar," she said. "Let me guess it's a system glitch or an old piece of space junk floating by." Jax peered over her shoulder, squinting at the data. "Or maybe it's the Martian overlords finally coming to check on their investment. Wouldn't that be a hoot?" Riven said. "But no, it's tracking something. Biological." Jax leaned closer, intrigued. "Biological, on Mars." "Now that's comedy." Riven fiddled with the controls, enhancing the signal. "I swear if this turns out to be some rare bacteria, I'm going to quit science and become a full-time dirt enthusiast like you." "Hey, dirt has its virtues," Jax defended. "Like being everywhere and impossible to lose." The console beeped again, this time more urgently. "Okay, that can't be right," Riven murmured, tapping the screen as if it would suddenly make sense. Jax's eyes narrowed as he studied the readings. "That looks almost like brainwaves." Riven's skepticism deepened. "Sure, because the only thing Mars was missing was sentient sand. But the readings persisted, a stubborn anomaly refusing to be ignored." "This is either the breakthrough of a lifetime or the setup to the worst sci-fi plot ever," she said. "Or both," Jax suggested, his grin bordering on manic. "What do we do, Doc?" Riven considered their options, which, like everything on Mars, were limited. "We ignore it and pretend it never happened," she started, "or we investigate and probably regret it," Jax finished for her, clearly relishing the latter option. "Why do I get the feeling you jump at the chance for a terrible idea? Because terrible ideas are the spice of life, Riven. Without them, we'd just be left with, well, reality." Riven sighed, conceding. "Fine, let's check it out. But if we wake up an ancient alien civilization, I'm blaming you." Jax saluted her with mock seriousness. "The aliens will have to take a number. There's a long line of people already blaming me for things." The pair made their way through the dimly lit corridors of the colony, dodging malfunctioning equipment and puddles of condensation from the overworked air recyclers. The place had all the charm of a forgotten basement, if basements were prone to sudden depressurization. They reached a small observation room, a place that was more rumor than reality among the colonists. "I always thought this was just a myth," Jax admitted, peering inside. "Most myths don't come with door codes," Riven responded, punching in a sequence learned from too many late nights spent hacking the colony's outdated systems. The door creaked open, revealing a chamber filled with equipment that looked suspiciously more advanced than anything else they'd seen on Mars. "Well, this isn't ominous at all," Jax said, stepping inside. Riven followed, her eyes drawn to a large central monitor displaying what looked like EEG patterns. "Okay, now this is getting weird," she muttered. "Weird enough to make you miss the dirt," Jax teased. "Almost," Riven conceded, running her fingers over the console. "This is definitely monitoring brain activity, but from where?" Jax gestured to a series of tubes lining the walls, each one glowing faintly. "Maybe these," Riven frowned. "You think they're using these to study us?" Jax shrugged. "Stranger things have happened. Remember that time it rained fish on Earth?" "That's just an urban legend," Riven said, distracted as she tried to decipher the data. "Yeah, so were Martian colonies until about 50 years ago," Jax countered. The monitor beeped again, and Riven's face lit up with a discovery that was equal parts thrilling and terrifying. "These readings, they're not from us," she said slowly. "Then from who?" Jax asked, his playful tone suddenly serious. "I don't know," Riven admitted. "But whoever or whatever it is, it's watching our dreams." Jax glanced around the room, the weight of their situation sinking in. "Great. As if I didn't have enough trouble sleeping already." Riven laughed, though it was a brittle sound. "Look at it this way. At least now we know why we have such vivid nightmares." Jax shook his head, still processing. "So what do we do now?" Riven leaned against the console, contemplating their next move. "We find out who's behind this," she said, determination stealing her voice. "And why they're so interested in our dreams." Jax nodded, a grin spreading across his face. "Sounds like another terrible idea. Count me in." As they left the room, the monitor continued its silent vigil, its readings a stark reminder that in the vast emptiness of space, humanity was not as alone as it liked to think. And somewhere deep beneath the red surface of Mars, secrets were stirring, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. "Hey Riven," Jax called as they made their way back to the lab. "If this turns into some alien invasion, we're not going to get blamed, right?" Riven smirked. "Don't worry. I've got plenty of other people to point fingers at." Jax chuckled. "Good to know. You think they dream too?" Riven shrugged. "If they do, I hope they're better at it than we are." And with that they returned to their half-scrap, half-genius lab, ready to unravel the mystery of the alien presence. After all, Riven thought wryly, if a couple of dirt-smeared misfits couldn't save the universe, who could? Riven leaned back in her chair, staring at the blinking console as if it might suddenly sprout legs and dance. "So, let's recap. We've potentially stumbled upon an alien reality show where our dreams are prime-time entertainment." Jax scratched his dusty head, Martian dirt cascading like a budget waterfall. "Think they rate them? I'd hate to get a poor review from some intergalactic critic. Given our track record, I'd be more worried about getting cancelled," Riven replied, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "The way I see it, we're live on Martian TV and nobody bothered to give us a script." Jax leaned against the wall, which emitted a tired sigh, much like its owner. "What do you make of all these EEG readings, then? Are we talking about some alien trying to learn our deepest secrets, or just bored cosmic neighbors looking for a laugh?" Riven frowned, narrowing her eyes at the data. "If there's one thing I've learned from science, it's that the universe is a jerk. These readings suggest they don't understand our dreams, which is oddly comforting." Jax snorted, his perpetual grin widening. "Comforting? Great. So we've got aliens tuning in to our nightly reruns, and they can't even follow the plot." "It's more than that," Riven said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. They see our dreams as a threat or a key to something they can't grasp. Maybe resilience, maybe something else. Resilience, huh? Jax nodded. So you're saying our nightmares are their worst-case scenarios, possibly, Riven admitted. Our ability to dream might be what makes us human. It's a way to process, adapt, survive in conditions like this. She gestured around the grimy lab as if the dripping pipes and flickering lights were the epitome of human struggle. Jax chuckled, a low rumble that echoed off the walls. Bet they've never had to deal with Martian plumbing. That's resilience. Or insanity, Riven replied with a wry smile. But seriously, if they're studying us, it's because they can't dream. And if they can't dream, they might see our ability as a weapon. Jax considered this, his expression thoughtful in a way that was rare for him. So, what do they want? To stop us from dreaming or to learn how? Either way, it's bad news for us, Riven said with a sigh. We're stuck in a basement on a planet nobody sane would want, and now we're at the center of an alien mystery. Hey, at least life's not boring anymore, Jax retorted, ever the optimist. Right, because suffocating under a pile of alien intrigue is so much better than dying of boredom, Riven shot back. A sudden thought struck Jax, and he turned to Riven with a mischievous glint in his eye. You think the rest of the colony knows about this, given how chatty they are? Doubtful, Riven replied. We're probably the only idiots lucky enough to stumble into this mess. Then maybe it's time we did some more stumbling, Jax suggested, the gleam in his eyes unmistakably dangerous. Find out what these aliens want. Could be our ticket to. I don't know something better than this. Riven sighed, a deep exhale that carried the weight of too many late nights and too much coffee. Fine, but if we end up in some alien zoo, I'm blaming you. Deal, Jax said, clapping her on the shoulder. As long as they don't make us watch old Earth sitcoms on repeat. I can barely handle them once. With a plan as vague as their understanding of the alien situation, they set out once more. The corridors of their underground labyrinth were as welcoming as a dentist's chair, but at least they knew them well. Each turn, each flickering light bulb was a familiar signpost on their bleak journey. So, what's the next step in our grand scheme? Jax asked, his voice bouncing off the sterile walls. We need more data, Riven replied. There might be more hidden rooms like the one we found. They probably contain more info, maybe even a way to communicate. And if we can't communicate, Jax asked, then we'll have to improvise, Riven said. We're humans. Making things up as we go is practically our species' motto. As they navigated the dank halls, dodging the odd puddle of condensation and avoiding the occasional rat-like creature that had somehow made Mars home, Jax couldn't help but chuckle. What's so funny? Riven asked. Just thinking, Jax said. If these aliens are watching our dreams, they've seen some weird stuff. Riven laughed, a short, sharp bark. What, like that time you dreamt you were a giant potato? Hey, I was a very dignified potato, Jax said defensively. And anyway, it's not like your dreams are normal. Remember the one where you were a tap-dancing chicken? That was performance art, Riven countered, though her smirk betrayed her amusement. Their banter was interrupted by an ominous creak from the ceiling above. Dust rained down and Jax instinctively ducked, despite knowing full well that if the ceiling decided to cave in, ducking wouldn't save him. Ah, the joys of living in a structurally unsound colonial nightmare, he commented, brushing debris from his shoulders. Let's hope the aliens aren't counting on this place to last, Riven said, her eyes scanning the corridor ahead. After what felt like a marathon in the world's worst maze, they reached another locked door. This one was more heavily secured than the last, suggesting something important lay beyond. Riven crouched by the panel, her fingers deftly working the keypad. If there's something valuable in here, I'm claiming first dibs, sure thing. I'll take the alien blasters, Jax joked, though his eyes were serious as they watched the door swing open. Inside, the room was eerily quiet, filled with technology that made their lab look like it belonged in a history museum. Screens displayed streams of incomprehensible data, and in the center, a large cylinder pulsed with a faint blue light. Now that looks important, Jax said, stepping forward. Be careful, Riven warned, but her own curiosity pulled her closer to the glowing device. This might be what they are using to monitor us. Jax frowned, tapping the cylinder lightly. Feels warm. You think it's alive? Could be, Riven said, scanning the readouts. Or it's some kind of network node. If we can access it, we might be able to find out what's really going on. Or we could end up frying our brains, Jax pointed out. True, but what's life without a little risk? Riven replied, her fingers dancing over the alien console. The device hummed, its glow intensifying as the room filled with a low thrumming sound. Jax took a step back, his instincts screaming that this was a bad idea. Riven, he said warily, I think you poked it too hard. The screens flickered, displaying a series of symbols that looked suspiciously like a warning. Oops, Riven said, though her tone was more fascinated than concerned. Looks like we woke it up. Any chance this is the part where it tells us the meaning of life? Jax asked, half serious. Doubtful, Riven replied. But maybe it'll tell us what they want. As if responding to her words, a section of the screen morphed, displaying a series of images. They were crude, almost childlike in simplicity, depicting humans dreaming, followed by a question mark. They really don't get it, do they? Jax said, shaking his head. Nope, Riven agreed. Our subconscious is a mystery to them. But why? The images shifted, showing a hierarchy of alien figures, each one marked with different symbols. It was a caste system, with the dreamless creatures at the top and a question mark at the bottom. They see our dreams as a missing piece, Riven realized. Something they can't have, guess that makes us special, Jax said with a hint of pride. Or a target, Riven countered. If they see our dreams as a threat, they might want to eliminate us. Jax crossed his arms, thinking, or maybe they want to control it. Use it, that's a comforting thought, Riven said dryly. Mind control via dream broadcasting could be worse, Jax replied. At least it's not alien reality TV, the console beeped, interrupting their musings. A final image appeared, showing Earth with a countdown overlay. Oh, Jax said. That doesn't look good. Looks like they are on a schedule, Riven said, her face set in grim determination. We need to find out what happens when that timer hits 0. Well, I always wanted to be on a countdown, Jax said, trying to lighten the mood. Riven smirked, though her eyes were serious. Let's hope this isn't one of those you have 10 minutes to live kind of deals. Wouldn't be the first time, Jax said, flashing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. So what's the plan, fearless leader? We need to warn the others, Riven said. Even if they think we're crazy. Crazy's better than dead, Jax agreed. Let's rally the troops. As they left the room, the alien device continued its enigmatic vigil, the countdown ticking inexorably toward an unknown fate. In the dim, dusty corridors of their Martian bunker, Riven and Jax prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead, armed with nothing more than their wits and a sense of humor as dry as the Martian landscape. Their footsteps echoed in the silence, a reminder that in the vast, uncaring universe, humanity's greatest weapon was its ability to dream, a dream that might just save them all. Hey, Riven, Jax said as they walked. Think the aliens dream of electric sheep, Riven chuckled. If they do, let's hope they are allergic. And with that, they plunged back into their grim reality, ready to confront an alien mystery that could redefine humanity's place in the cosmos. So, you think the Martian colony is ready for a little rebellion? Jax asked, lounging back in his creaky chair, feet propped up on a console that probably cost more than his life insurance. Riven didn't even glance up from her screen, where EEG readings danced like badly choreographed ballet. Martians have been rebelling since the first oxygen tank broke down. They're ready, Jax nodded, a smirk playing on his lips. Good, 'cause I think it's time we gave them a real reason to grumble, and maybe, just maybe, save our skins in the process. The lab was a symphony of chaos, blinking lights, the hum of overworked machinery, and the occasional drip of water that would have made a plumber cry. Perfect setting for the most important meeting of their miserable lives. Riven tapped a few keys, bringing up a new set of readings. "These aliens," she began, the words rolling off her tongue like a conspiracy theorist at a flat Earth convention. "They're obsessed with our dreams. But the readings don't make sense. There's a pattern, but it's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube with your elbows. Sounds like your kind of challenge," Jax teased, cracking open a can of the suspiciously labeled Energy X. "Meanwhile, I'll work my magic with the folks upstairs. See if we can't whip up a little support." Riven snorted, sparing him a glance. "Your magic? Last time you got involved, we ended up with a colony-wide blackout." "Hey, that was a technical glitch," Jax protested, raising his hands defensively. "Besides, it brought people together. Nothing like a good blackout to remind us we all hate living here." With a sigh, Riven waved him off. "Fine, just don't promise them anything we don't have." "Relax," Jax grinned, tossing the empty can into the corner with a clatter. "I'll stick to the basics: freedom, hope, and the possibility of less government-mandated protein paste." As Jax headed out, Riven returned her focus to the screens. The EEG readings had a rhythm, a pulse that seemed almost human, but the aliens couldn't understand it. And that, as far as she was concerned, was both a blessing and a curse. Her fingers danced over the console, running simulations, adjusting variables, and occasionally cursing the stubbornness of alien technology. If they were going to survive whatever celestial countdown was looming over them, understanding dreams was key. Either that, or they were screwed. Hours passed, though time on Mars was as tangible as a politician's promise. The lab's overhead lights flickered sporadically, casting long shadows that danced with a life of their own. Riven could have sworn she heard them laughing at her. Meanwhile, Jax was playing the diplomat, a role that suited him about as well as a tuxedo would a gorilla. The colony was a patchwork of disillusionment, its residents as diverse as a thrift store's bargain bin. He found his first recruits in the mess hall, where the smell of boiled despair lingered over the day's unidentifiable stew. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted misfits," Jax began, clapping his hands with the enthusiasm of a salesman pitching snake oil. A few heads turned, some weary, others curious, all reflecting the universal dullness of Martian life. It was a start. "Got a proposition for you," he continued, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "How'd you like to stick it to the man, or alien in this case?" A chorus of murmurs followed, the kind of grumbling that preludes a bar brawl or a revolution, depending on the crowd. "What's in it for us?" a voice called from the back, gruff and skeptical. "Freedom," Jax replied, spreading his arms wide. "Or at least the illusion of it, plus maybe a chance to breathe without choking on bureaucracy." The group chuckled, a sound that held more agreement than any formal vote. Encouraged, Jax pressed on. "But we need brains and brawn. Basically anyone with a pulse and a grudge." A wiry man, his face etched with the lines of someone who'd seen too many Martian sunrises, raised a scarred hand. "Count me in. I owe those alien bastards a black eye." Jax grinned, feeling the momentum build. "Welcome aboard. Remember, this isn't about us. It's about dreams." Literally, with a mix of reluctance and curiosity, more hands followed, a ragtag assembly of miners, technicians, and those with nothing to lose except their crappy lot in life. Back in the lab, Riven was neck-deep in scientific chaos. The EEG patterns were shifting, aligning into something that almost resembled coherence. Almost. "Come on," she muttered, eyes narrowed in concentration as if staring hard enough would force the data to make sense. "Give me something." The console beeped, a sound she'd come to associate with impending doom or rare success. This time it was the latter. Kind of. An anomaly appeared, a spike in the data that shouldn't exist but did. It pulsed with a frequency that resonated deep within her bones, a rhythm as primal as the heartbeat. Riven's hands shook with a cocktail of excitement and exhaustion. She was close, closer than she'd ever been, but the answers were wrapped in layers of alien enigma and human frustration. It was then that Jax returned, his entrance marked by the familiar clatter of equipment bumped by his careless swagger. "Good news," he announced, his voice tinged with the thrill of impending chaos. "I'm on the verge of a breakthrough," Riven said, her eyes never leaving the screen. "Or a breakdown, hard to tell." Jax peered over her shoulder, squinting at the mess of data. "Looks like abstract art. You sure you didn't accidentally create modern alien literature?" "Funny," she deadpanned, though the hint of a smile tugged at her lips. "This anomaly. It might be the key. If we can understand why this pattern exists, maybe we can prove our dreams aren't just nonsense to them." "Great," Jax said, clapping his hands together. "And if that doesn't work, I've got a bunch of angry colonists ready to stage a revolt." Riven turned to him, her gaze sharp and appraising. "You actually pulled it off." "Yeah, turns out people are more motivated by the chance to thumb their noses at authority than I thought," he replied with a shrug. "Who'd have guessed? Everyone who's ever been governed," Riven said dryly. Jax laughed, a sound that echoed with rebellion. "So what's next on our grand agenda of survival? We need to amplify this signal," Riven decided, her mind already racing through possibilities. "Show them the power of human dreams. Maybe then they'll see us as more than just experimental subjects." "And if they don't?" Jax asked, his tone serious despite the ever-present glint in his eye. "Then we improvise," Riven replied, that familiar resolve hardening her voice. "Like always." Jax nodded, the weight of their shared burden settling comfortably on his shoulders. "All right, I'll get the team ready. It's showtime." As Jax left to rally their motley crew, Riven worked with renewed vigor, her fingers flying over the console like a conductor orchestrating a cosmic symphony. The lab was alive with the hum of technology and the crackle of human willpower. Their plan was as fragile as the air on Mars, but it was all they had. And in the grand scheme of things, it was more than enough. The hours ticked by, and the countdown on the alien device loomed ever closer, a silent reminder of their ticking clock. But for Riven and Jax, it was just another obstacle in a life full of them. By the time Jax returned, the lab was buzzing with an energy that was both frantic and hopeful. "The gang's all here," he announced, gesturing to the group of colonists assembled in the cramped space. "Excellent," Riven said, meeting the eyes of each person, seeing the glint of determination mirrored in their expressions. "Listen up. What we're about to do is risky, but it's our best shot." The room fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on them all. "We're going to amplify a signal," she explained, "one that shows the true power of human dreams. It might confuse them, maybe even scare them. But it will make them think twice about underestimating us." "Think they'll buy it?" asked the wiry man from earlier, his voice skeptical but hopeful. "Doesn't matter," Riven replied, her voice firm. "What matters is that we try, and if it doesn't work, we'll go down fighting." "Sounds like a plan," Jax interjected, his grin as infectious as ever. "And if we fail, well, at least we won't have to worry about mortgage payments." The group chuckled, a sound that was more defiant than amused. "All right, let's get to work," Riven said, turning back to the console. "Jax, you handle the power distribution. Everyone else follow my lead." The lab became a hive of activity, each person playing their part in the grand scheme of survival. The odds were against them, but when had that ever stopped humanity? Riven's fingers danced over the keys, making adjustments, calibrating frequencies, and hoping against hope that the signal would be enough. As the countdown continued its relentless march, she felt a strange calm settle over her. This was it. Their last stand, their final gamble. And if it didn't work, well, at least they'd go out swinging. The countdown ticked down to mere minutes, the tension in the room as thick as Martian dust. But they were ready, or as ready as they'd ever be. "Hit it," Riven commanded, her voice steady and strong. Jax flicked a switch, and the room was bathed in a low hum, the lights dimming as power surged into the console. The signal was live, a beacon of defiance aimed at the cosmos. The screens flickered, the alien data swirling into a chaotic dance, but beneath it all the anomaly pulsed with a rhythm that was undeniably human. They watched, breath held, as the countdown hit 0. The silence that followed was deafening, a void filled with anticipation and dread. But then, a response. The alien device blinked, a series of symbols flashing across the screen, indecipherable yet undeniably intrigued. "Looks like we got their attention," Jack said, his voice hushed with awe. "Let's just hope it's the right kind," Riven replied, her heart pounding in her chest. And so they waited, caught in the balance between hope and despair, their fate resting in the hands of beings who couldn't dream. It was a gamble, but one worth taking. Because in the end, dreams were all they had. And maybe, just maybe, they were enough. The lab felt more like a pressure cooker than a sanctuary these days, and the tension was rising like a bad soufflé. Riven was knee-deep in data, surrounded by blinking consoles and the constant hum of overworked machinery. It was like trying to find a needle in a haystack, except the needle was a life-saving discovery, and the haystack was a tangled mess of alien code and human desperation. Jax was lounging in his usual spot, feet propped up on a console that cost more than the colony's entire monthly rations. He was sipping on an Energy X can, the contents of which were as questionable as his leadership skills. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he remarked, watching Riven with a lazy grin. "Or maybe just realized your paycheck's late again." "Funny," Riven shot back, not lifting her eyes from the screen. "But I've got something better than ghosts. I've got data." She tapped the screen, highlighting a section that pulsed with a pattern that was almost hypnotic. "See this? It's tied to emotional resilience. Our dreams are like an emotional endurance test, and the aliens can't handle it." Jax raised an eyebrow, interested despite himself. "So, what you're saying is we're emotionally superior," Riven smirked. "In a twisted, stress-induced way, yes. Our dreams keep us going, give us hope. Something they've never needed to develop because their world doesn't kick them in the teeth every chance it gets. Well, that explains why they look like they've been sucking on lemons their whole lives," Jax said, leaning forward with a spark of mischief in his eyes. "So, what's the plan? We bore them to death with our dreams." "More like we overwhelm them," Riven replied, a gleam of determination in her gaze. "We show them what they are missing, make them see us as more than just lab rats." "Good, because I was getting tired of playing the rat," Jax said, stretching his arms above his head. "But first, we need to survive their surveillance. They've been upping their game and panic's spreading faster than a cold in a daycare." Riven nodded, biting her lip in thought. "We need to buy ourselves time. Keep them distracted while we amplify the signal, and we have to do it without tipping them off." "Great," Jax said, rubbing his hands together. "More cloak and dagger, just what I signed up for." The colony was a melting pot of anxiety and irritation, a place where nerves were frayed and tempers even more so. The aliens' latest surveillance sweep had everyone on edge, and it was only a matter of time before someone snapped. In the mess hall, a group of colonists huddled together, their voices low and filled with unease. Jax entered with his usual swagger, but even he couldn't ignore the tension that hung in the air like a thundercloud. "Hey, folks," he greeted, plastering on a smile that was as fake as the meat in Tuesday's stew. "Just came to remind you all to keep your cool. We're working on a plan." One of the colonists, a grizzled man with a voice like gravel, spat on the floor. "Plan? They've got eyes everywhere. We're sitting ducks, and you know it." Jax nodded, acknowledging the truth in the man's words. "Yeah, but ducks have their moments. Ever seen one waddle away from a hunter? It's a sight to behold." The colonists exchanged dubious glances, but the hint of a smile tugged at the corners of a few mouths. "So, what's the plan?" another asked, a woman whose eyes were as sharp as her tongue. "We're going to give them a show they won't forget," Jax replied, leaning in conspiratorially. "And while they're watching, we'll be making our own moves." Back in the lab, Riven was refining the signal, her mind a whirl of calculations and caffeine. The revelation about human dreams being linked to emotional resilience was a double-edged sword. It was their strength, yes, but it also made them unpredictable, unquantifiable. And that made the aliens nervous. The lab console beeped, a reminder that time was slipping through their fingers like sand. But if there was one thing Riven excelled at, it was working under pressure. Her fingers flew over the keys, adjusting frequencies, aligning patterns, praying that they could keep the aliens at bay long enough to make a difference. Jax returned, his entrance marked by the familiar clatter of equipment. "How's it going, genius?" Riven didn't look up, her focus unwavering. "We're getting there, and by there I mean a point where we're not immediately screwed." "Well, that's better than usual," Jax quipped, glancing at the data over her shoulder. "Think it'll be enough?" "It has to be," Riven replied, her voice firm. "Otherwise, we're going to find out if they dream of electric sheep." Jax snorted, a sound that was more derisive than amused. "I'm betting no, and if they do, it's probably more like nightmares." "You're not wrong," Riven said, a wry smile playing on her lips. "Let's just hope our dreams are the stuff of their nightmares." They worked in tandem, a symphony of chaos and precision that was as exhausting as it was exhilarating. The countdown on the alien device was relentless, but so were they. The colonists were on edge, tension building to a fever pitch as the alien surveillance intensified. But Jax's earlier pep talk had ignited a spark of defiance, and the colony was ready to fight back, even if it was with nothing more than grit and gallows humor. As the final minutes approached, Riven and Jax took a moment to breathe, to steady themselves for what lay ahead. The lab was silent, save for the hum of machinery and the pounding of their hearts. Jax broke the silence, his voice low and filled with a rare sincerity. "You ready for this?" Riven nodded, meeting his gaze with unwavering resolve. "Ready as I'll ever be." "Let's show them what we're made of." Jax grinned, a smile that was more wolfish than reassuring. "Then let's give him hell." The countdown hit 0 and the signal went live. The screens flared to life with alien symbols, a chaotic ballet of light and data that was as mesmerizing as it was incomprehensible. The colonists watched from the mess hall, their eyes glued to the old holovid screen Jax had commandeered for the occasion. It flickered and buzzed, a relic of a bygone era, but it was their lifeline to the unfolding drama. The alien response was immediate and intense, a flurry of signals and probes as they scrambled to understand what they were seeing. The colony held its collective breath, caught between fear and hope, as the aliens hesitated, uncertainty creeping into their calculations. "We did it," Riven breathed, her voice a mix of relief and disbelief. "We've got their attention." Jax clapped her on the shoulder, his grin broad and infectious. "I knew you could do it. Now let's see if they can handle what we've got." The colony erupted into cheers, a sound that was equal parts celebration and defiance. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a step in the right direction. As the aliens scrambled to make sense of the human anomaly, Riven and Jax exchanged a look that spoke volumes. They had set the stage, but the play was far from over. In the quiet aftermath, as the lab hummed with energy and the colonists basked in their small triumph, Jax leaned back in his chair, the smug satisfaction of a job well done etched across his features. "You know," he said, breaking the silence with his usual irreverence, "if this whole rebellion thing doesn't pan out, we could always go into show business." Riven chuckled, the sound a soothing balm to her frayed nerves. "Sure, because there's nothing the universe loves more than a couple of Martians with a flair for the dramatic." "Hey, who knows?" Jax shot back, his grin as wide as the Martian horizon. "Maybe aliens will start paying for the privilege of watching us dream. We could finally fund that vacation to Earth. Assuming there's anything left of us by the time this is over," Riven replied dryly, but there was a lightness in her tone that hadn't been there before. As the colony settled into a restless calm, the weight of their actions began to sink in. They had poked the alien bear, and now they had to wait and see where the chips would fall. But for the first time in a long time, they had hope. It was a fragile thing, as tenuous as the air they breathed, but it was enough to keep them going. And as Riven and Jax faced the unknown future, they did so with the knowledge that they were no longer alone. They had each other, a ragtag band of dreamers and fighters, united in their defiance. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with pitfalls and perils, but they were ready. Because if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was surviving against the odds. And so, with a final glance at the flickering screens and the alien symbols that danced upon them, Riven and Jax steeled themselves for whatever came next. They were ready to face the darkness, ready to dream. Riven and Jax sat in the barely habitable confines of their Martian basement lab, the walls smudged with grime and air thick with the smell of cheap coffee and desperation. The lab was a chaotic mess of blinking lights, cables that snaked around like lazy anacondas, and machines that looked one jolt away from a nervous breakdown. It wasn't much, but it was home. And at the moment, it was all they had between them and oblivion. Riven rubbed her temples, fatigue etched in the lines of her face. I swear, if I ever see another blinking light, I'm going to rip it out and use it as a nightlight for the aliens' nightmares. Jax chuckled, though it was more of a tired exhalation than anything else. He was sprawled out on a makeshift chair, his feet propped up on an expensive console that had seen better days. At this rate, we'll be buying those aliens' nightlights by the dozen, assuming they don't decide to vaporize us first. She gave him a sideways glance. Really optimistic today, aren't you? Hey, I'm just trying to make sure we have realistic goals. Like not dying horribly in the next 24 hours, Jax replied, cracking open another can of Energy X. The hiss of escaping gas mingled with the persistent whirring of the lab equipment. Look on the bright side. If they do decide to wipe us out, at least we won't have to worry about next month's rent. The levity was short-lived as the lab console beeped insistently, pulling Riven back to the grim reality of their situation. Damn it, she muttered, scanning the data. They're closing in faster than we thought. Jax peered over her shoulder, squinting at the screen. So, what's the play, Chief Scientist? Got any genius ideas to keep us from being little more than a smudge on the Martian landscape? Riven sighed, pushing her hair back from her face. We need more time. I've been tweaking the signal to keep them distracted, but it's like trying to plug a dam with a soggy piece of toast. Jax took a slow sip from his can, savoring the dubious taste of artificial energy. Well, they say breakfast is the most important meal of the day, right? He leaned back, letting the chair creak ominously under his weight. How do we keep them at bay without getting ourselves killed in the process? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Riven glanced around the lab, eyes darting from one piece of equipment to another. We've got to use everything we've got. Make it look like we're a bigger threat than we are. Smoke and mirrors, then, Jax mused, tapping his chin. I like it. Classic magician's trick. Maybe add some fireworks for good measure. I was thinking more along the lines of electromagnetic pulses and signal disruptors, Riven replied dryly. But sure, let's throw in some sparklers if it makes you feel better. Jax grinned, a flash of teeth in the dim light. You know me, always a fan of a good spectacle. The lab's door creaked open and in walked a harried-looking technician, his face pale and drawn. We've got a problem, he announced, his voice a mix of fear and urgency. Just one. Must be our lucky day, Jax quipped, though there was no humor in his eyes. The aliens have deployed some sort of jamming field, the technician continued, ignoring Jax's sarcasm. It's blocking our outgoing signals. Riven swore under her breath, her mind racing. Of course they did. Why wouldn't they make this more complicated? Jax tossed his empty Energy X can into a nearby bin with a clatter. Well, that's just great. Any bright ideas, or are we officially screwed? We're only screwed if we give up, Riven shot back, her voice steely. We need to find a way around their jamming. Maybe we can reroute the signal through the old Martian TV network. It's ancient, but it might just be out of their range. Jax's eyebrows shot up. Martian TV? You mean that relic from the days when people thought reality shows were a good idea? Are you sure it's even operational? Riven shrugged, already moving to a console that looked like it had been salvaged from a junkyard. It's a long shot, but it's all we've got. As she worked, Jax watched her with an odd mixture of admiration and amusement. "You know, sometimes I think you actually like this whole saving the world from aliens gig." She paused long enough to shoot him a look. "Let's just say it's not the worst way to spend a Tuesday." The technician hovered nearby, wringing his hands. "If you're wrong, they'll be on us in minutes." Riven didn't look up, her fingers dancing over the keys. "Then let's make sure I'm not wrong." Minutes dragged by like hours as tension mounted. The colony was a powder keg, each second ticking away like a countdown to disaster. Outside, the Martian wind howled, a mournful sound that echoed within the colony walls. It was a reminder of the hostile world they called home, a place that was as unforgiving as the aliens now bearing down on them. Finally, Riven straightened, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "Got it. The signal's rerouted. It's not perfect, but it should buy us some time." Jax clapped his hands together, his face a mask of exaggerated relief. "Well, hallelujah. We might just live to see another episode of Martian Housewives." The technician let out a shaky breath, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. "You think this will work?" "It has to," Riven replied, her voice firm but her eyes betraying a flicker of doubt. "We've come too far to let them win now." Jax picked up another can of Energy X, tossing it to Riven, who caught it with a nod of thanks. "Here's to making it through another day." "Another day," she echoed, cracking open the can and taking a sip. It was a toast to survival, a small moment of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. As the lab buzzed with renewed energy, the weight of their predicament settled over them once more. They were fighting a battle against a foe far stronger and more advanced than they could ever hope to be. But they were human, and that meant they were stubborn enough to try anyway. Jax turned to Riven, a wry smile on his lips. "You know, for a bunch of lab rats, we're doing one hell of a job at playing hero." Riven laughed, a sound that was both weary and filled with determination. "Let's see if we can keep it up. After all, Martians have never been good at following the script." "Here's hoping," Jax replied, raising his can in a mock salute. To the unscripted moments, the technician, still hovering, finally allowed himself a small, tentative smile. "I'll drink to that." As the trio stood amidst the chaos and uncertainty, they knew that the fight was far from over, but they had hope, and as long as they had that, they had a chance. And so they drank, not just to their survival, but to the spirit of defiance that burned within them. It was a flame that flickered and waned but never extinguished, not while they still had breath in their bodies. The aliens might have had the upper hand, but Riven and Jax had something far more valuable: the will to dream and the courage to fight for those dreams, no matter the cost. Outside the lab, the wind continued to howl, but within its walls there was a resolute calm. They might not have been able to see the future, but they were determined to face it head-on, one unsure step at a time. Jax looked over at Riven, his eyes glinting with mischief despite the gravity of their situation. "You know, if we survive this, I might just write a book about it. How to outwit aliens and other handy tips for Martian living." Riven snorted, shaking her head. "Add a chapter on how to make coffee last longer than your sanity, and you might have a bestseller." "Done," Jax replied, raising his can once more. "Here's to making it to the end of the book." "To the end," Riven echoed, and together they drank to whatever future awaited them on the red, unyielding planet. As they stood in the dimly lit lab, surrounded by the hum of machinery and the ghosts of dreams yet to be realized, they knew one thing for certain: they were ready. Ready to fight, ready to dream, ready to face the darkness with open eyes and unfaltering hearts. And in that moment, as the stars shone cold and distant above Mars, the two of them stood together, a bulwark against the uncertainty and fear that lay ahead. For they were Martians, and Martians never gave up. Riven stood over the console, a frown creasing her already tired features. The data she'd been poring over for what felt like eons was finally starting to make some sense, or at least as much sense as anything made these days on Mars, where the air was thin and the coffee even thinner. "Well, would you look at that," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. Jax, who was lounging nearby, a can of Energy X precariously balanced on his knee, peered over his shoulder. "What? You finally found a way to turn that thing into a microwave, because I could really go for a snack." Riven rolled her eyes. "No, you dolt. It's the EEG readings. I've been analyzing them, in between trying not to die and all that." Jack sat up a little straighter, his interest piqued despite himself. And, Riven continued, a hint of triumph in her voice, "there's a genetic anomaly, something unique to humans. It's like a spark that fuels our dreaming capability." Jax blinked. "A spark, huh? So we're basically walking lighters." "That's your big revelation." "It's more than that, you snarky bastard," Riven said, not without affection. "It's what makes our dreams so vivid, so impossible for the aliens to understand. It's why they're so obsessed." He let out a low whistle. "So what you're saying is we're more special than we thought. Just not in the 'my mom says I'm amazing' kind of way." "Exactly," Riven replied, a grudging smile tugging at her lips. "This genetic anomaly could be the key to turning the tide." Jax leaned back, considering. "Okay, so we've got a spark. How do we turn that into a bonfire and burn some alien asses?" Riven tapped the screen thoughtfully, her mind racing ahead. "If we can amplify this anomaly, make it stronger, we might be able to weaponize it. Use our dreams against them somehow." Jax looked at her, a mixture of awe and skepticism. "You want to weaponize dreams? That's some next-level psychological warfare right there." "Desperate times, Jax. Desperate times," Riven said, her eyes scanning the console for inspiration. "But how do we go about it? We can't just sprinkle some fairy dust and hope for the best." "No, but we can use what we have," Riven replied, her voice steady. "We've got equipment, outdated as it is, and I know a thing or two about genetic manipulation." "Genetic manipulation?" Jax raised an eyebrow. "You really are a mad scientist, aren't you?" "I prefer the term innovative genius," Riven shot back, smirking. "Tomato, tomato," Jax said, waving a hand dismissively. "But seriously, how do we pull this off without dying in the process?" Riven paused, her gaze distant as she considered the options. "We'll need to harness the colony's resources. I'll have to tweak the equipment to amplify the genetic markers. It'll take time." "Time. The one thing we don't have," Jax muttered, taking a swig of his drink. "Then we make time," Riven insisted, her voice firm. "We distract them, keep them off our backs long enough to give this a shot." He nodded slowly. "Speaking of distractions, my little resistance group has been itching for some action. Maybe it's time they got their hands dirty." "That sounds dangerously like a plan, Jax," Riven said, arching an eyebrow. He shrugged. "What can I say? I'm full of surprises." Riven's fingers danced over the console, inputting commands with practiced efficiency. "I'll need access to the main server. If we can feed the signal through the colonist systems, we might be able to boost it enough to make an impact." "Leave that to me," Jax said, already on his feet, his usual cocky swagger returning. "I'll get the crew together. They'll be thrilled to hear they're not just sitting ducks anymore." "Good," Riven replied, a fierce determination in her eyes. "Let's make those aliens regret ever stepping foot near Mars." Jax gave her a mock salute before heading out, his mind already racing through the logistics of their next move. He passed the technician, who was still hovering on the edge of panic, and clapped him on the shoulder. "Hey, you. Yeah, you. Stop looking like you're about to wet yourself and get ready to help save the world." The technician blinked at him, nodding dumbly. Right, save the world." "A tab boy," Jax said with a grin, his spirits lifted by the prospect of a challenge. "Now go make yourself useful." As he left the lab, Jax couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement mingled with the ever-present fear. They were underdogs, sure, but they were also human. And if history had taught him anything, it was that humans were notoriously hard to keep down. Back in the lab, Riven worked with a single-minded focus, her mind churning through calculations and possibilities. The pounding of her heart matched the insistent whirring of the machines surrounding her, each beep and flash of light a reminder of the stakes. She was about to do the impossible, and with any luck, they'd make it out alive. Hours passed in a blur of activity as Jax rallied his ragtag resistance group. They were a motley crew, a mix of Martian settlers and Earth expats, all brought together by a common enemy. There was Voss, the grizzled old miner with a penchant for explosives, Danny, the sharp-eyed scout who could navigate the Martian terrain in her sleep, and Silas, the tech whiz with a love for creating chaos through code. "All right, listen up," Jack said, addressing the group in a dimly lit bunker that served as their makeshift headquarters. "We've got a plan, and it's a doozy. We're going to give the aliens a taste of their own medicine." Voss snorted, adjusting the strap of his weapon. "About time. I was beginning to think we'd die of boredom before they got around to killing us." Danny smirked, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. "So what's the play, Jax?" "We're going to turn our dreams into their worst nightmare," he said, laying out the details with a flourish. Silas, who had been quietly listening, raised a hand. "How do we know this will work? I mean, it's not exactly a textbook strategy." "Because it's the best shot we've got," Jax replied. "Besides, when have we ever followed the textbook?" The group exchanged glances, a mixture of excitement and trepidation in their eyes. They were risking everything, but for the first time in weeks, they had hope. "All right, let's do this," Voss said, his gruff voice laced with determination. "I've got some new toys I've been dying to try out." Jax grinned, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with a looming fight. "Then let's give those aliens a show they won't soon forget." Back in the lab, Riven was putting the final touches on her setup. The equipment hummed with energy, ready to channel the amplified genetic signals into a weaponized form. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, a reminder of all that was riding on their success. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the task ahead. Failure wasn't an option, not when so much was at stake. Jax returned, his expression a blend of nerves and excitement. "We're ready on our end." "How's it looking here?" "Locked and loaded," Riven replied, her fingers hovering over the console. "Just say the word and we'll get this show on the road." He nodded, a spark of determination in his eyes. "Then let's light this candle." With a final, decisive keystroke, Riven activated the system. The lab was filled with a low hum as the machinery sprang to life, the air crackling with energy. It was a gamble, a last-ditch effort to turn the tide, but it was all they had. Outside, the wind howled its relentless song, an eerie accompaniment to the tension within the colony. The aliens were out there, watching, waiting. But they weren't the only ones with a few tricks up their sleeves. As the signal pulsed through the colony's network, Riven felt a shiver of apprehension. It was working, but for how long? The aliens wouldn't remain unaware of their actions for long, and when they reacted, it would be with the full force of their technological might. "You know," Jax said, his voice breaking the silence, "if we pull this off, maybe we should start a new Martian holiday. Call it Screw the Aliens Day." Riven chuckled, the sound breaking through the tension. "I like the sound of that. Maybe we can even get some t-shirts printed." "Now you're talking," he replied, a grin splitting his face. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity as they waited for the alien response. It was a nerve-wracking game of cat and mouse, with the future of humanity hanging in the balance. And then, it happened. The console beeped, the data spiking with activity as the alien forces reacted to their gambit. "They're taking the bait," Riven said, her voice a mixture of relief and apprehension. Jax let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Now all we have to do is survive the fallout." The two of them exchanged a glance, a shared understanding passing between them. They were standing on the precipice of something monumental, and there was no going back. "Here's to making history," Jax said, raising his can in a toast. Riven smiled, her resolve stealing further. "To history," she agreed, and they drank to the unknown future that awaited them. As the lab thrummed with the energy of their defiance, Riven and Jax stood ready to face whatever came next. They were humans, dreamers, fighters, an unlikely pair against an implacable foe, but they would not back down. Not today. Not ever. Riven adjusted the console settings with the kind of precision that would make a brain surgeon jealous. The machinery whirred with the enthusiasm of an overcaffeinated intern on their first day, only without the risk of spilling coffee everywhere. Not that there was any to spill, Mars being the kind of place where coffee was more precious than gold, assuming you could find gold, which you couldn't, because that was on Mars too and buried under 1,000,000 tons of red dust. Jax was back in the lab, watching Riven with an expression somewhere between admiration and sheer terror. So, if this works, we'll be the first to weaponize dreams, right? Not exactly something you tell your mother about on Mother's Day, Riven snorted. Depends on the mother. Mine would probably approve. She always said dreams were a waste of time. This way, I'm kind of proving her wrong. Yeah, nothing like mass psychological warfare as a form of parental rebellion, Jax said. He popped open another can of Energy X. The hiss of escaping gas was like a sigh of relief from the can that had finally given up on ever being considered healthy. As the machinery hummed and lights blinked in patterns that could either spell salvation or doom, Riven tapped away, blending science with a touch of desperate magic. All right, the signal's being amplified through the colony's network. If the anomalies got any oomph, those aliens will feel it like a kick in their collective metaphorical nuts. Metaphorical? Jax raised an eyebrow. You mean they don't have? Nope, their anatomy is as bizarre as an accountant at a rock concert. Riven grinned without much joy. But who knows? Maybe we'll stir something up they didn't know they had. We're really betting on them being as emotionally incompetent as they are physically weird, Jax said, shaking his head. We're basically betting on them being alien teenagers. Outside the lab, the Martian wind howled with the fervor of a banshee with a hangover. The console beeped and Riven's eyes darted over the data. They're reacting all right. Signals disrupting their communication lattice. We've got their attention. Jax took a long drink from his can, the irony of the situation not lost on him. Great, now we just have to hope their confusion is bigger than their weaponry. You're surprisingly optimistic today, Riven quipped. Call it delusion, or the Energy X. Hard to tell the difference these days. The lab lights flickered, a reminder of how much they were pushing the system. Jax peered at the console with a mix of curiosity and dread. You ever think we're the bad guys in some alien documentary? And here we see the humans, tiny creatures of chaos whose idea of diplomacy is screwing with dreams. Riven rolled her eyes. If anyone's the bad guys, it's them. We're just improvising. The console's alert tone shifted, a sound like a cat that had swallowed a kazoo. Riven's fingers flew across the keyboard. They're recalibrating. Whatever we're doing, it's forcing them to reevaluate their entire approach. They've got a caste system that's going haywire. Rebel Martians. 1. Alien invaders. 0. Jax chuckled. Guess dreams are more threatening than we thought. Riven nodded, her expression grim yet determined. This buys us time, but it's just that, a delay. They'll adapt. Jax leaned against the console, his usual bravado dimmed by the weight of reality. Adaptation, humanity's favorite dance. We just need to make sure we're leading. Good thing we're not doing a tango. I've got 2 left feet, Riven said, her usual smirk returning for a brief appearance. Jax gestured at the blinking lights and whirring machines. So what now? We wait for them to regroup, or do we keep poking the hornet's nest? Riven exhaled, the kind of long-suffering sigh that only someone on a doomed planet could muster. We keep poking until the hornets decide Mars is more trouble than it's worth. Or maybe they decide to just apologize and leave, Jax snorted. Yeah, I'm sure the aliens have apology cards on standby. Sorry we tried to enslave you. We'll send chocolates next time. The lab door creaked as Silas, the tech whiz, shuffled in, his hair a disheveled mess that screamed I haven't seen a comb in weeks. Hey, I got the backup systems ready. If they try to overload us, we can reroute the power. Silas, you beautiful nerd, Jax beamed. You really think of everything, don't you? Silas shrugged, his face barely visible under the mop of hair. Life on Mars teaches you to expect the worst, like Jax's colorful personality. Hey, my personality is a national treasure, Jax protested. Sure, Silas replied deadpan. A treasure in the same way ancient cursed artifacts are. Riven chuckled despite herself. All right, let's keep this momentum. The signal's already causing chaos among their ranks. If we maintain it, we might just force them to rethink their whole approach to us. No pressure, Jack said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Just the survival of our entire species riding on this. Pressure's just motivation with a better marketing team, Riven shot back, her focus never leaving the console. The minutes dragged into an eternity, each tick of the digital clock a reminder of their precarious situation. Outside, the Martian winds continued their aimless wanderings over a desolate planet that had become humanity's last stand. Jax leaned in closer to the holovid screen, channeling some Earth comedy through the ancient contraption. The laugh track echoed through the lab, a surreal reminder of normalcy from a world that felt like a distant memory. You know, Jax said, if we ever get out of this alive, I might actually miss this place. The constant threat of death really puts a spin on things. Riven smirked. Stockholm Syndrome's a hell of a drug. A new blip on the console caught Riven's attention. She squinted at the data. Looks like their hierarchy's in disarray. They're fighting amongst themselves now. Good thing in fighting isn't just a human trait, Jax said. Maybe we should send them a welcome to the club card. Riven nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. If we can push them further, they'll be too busy dealing with internal chaos to bother with us. Divide and conquer, Jax mused. Oldest trick in the book. Old tricks are the best tricks, Riven replied, especially when you're short on new ones. The console emitted a series of frantic beeps, akin to a digital panic attack. They've realized what we're doing, Riven said, her voice tinged with urgency. We've got to keep the signal strong. Jax drained the last of his energy X, tossing the can aside with the nonchalance of a man who knows recycling is the least of his worries. Then let's give them a show they won't forget. The lab buzzed with energy as the systems pushed to their limits, each flicker of the lights a testament to their defiance. Outside, the wind continued to howl, a fitting soundtrack to the battle waging within. Think they'll get the message? Jax asked, adjusting the settings to maintain the signal. Riven nodded, her eyes fixed on the rapidly shifting data. They're getting the message all right. Question is, will they take the hint and leave us in peace or escalate? Jax shrugged. Either way, we're not backing down. The tension in the lab was palpable, a mix of anticipation and fear that electrified the air. They were betting everything on a long shot, but it was better than rolling over and accepting defeat. If they escalate, we'll just have to escalate right back, Riven said, her voice steely with determination. Ah, classic human stubbornness, Jax said. Makes you proud to be part of a species that's too dumb to quit. Riven laughed, a real, genuine laugh that cut through the tension like a knife. Too stubborn to quit, too desperate to fail. The minutes stretched on, each second a countdown to an uncertain fate. The aliens' response was unpredictable, their motives unknown, but for the first time there was a crack in their impenetrable facade. Think they are regretting their life choices yet? Jax asked, leaning back in his chair with a cocky grin. If they aren't, they will be, Riven replied, her confidence unwavering. Silas, monitoring the backup systems, glanced up with a rare smile. Looks like all those old Earth movies had it right. When in doubt, throw a wrench in the works. Or a dream, Jax added. The lab continued its relentless hum, a beacon of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. It was a gamble, a high-stakes game where the prize was survival itself. Here's to making those bastards squirm, Jax said, raising an imaginary glass in a toast. Riven returned the gesture with a nod. And to us, the unlikely heroes of this crazy, mixed-up story. As the battle raged on, Riven and Jax held their ground, determined to see things through to the bitter end. They were humans, dreamers, fighters, standing against an alien force that couldn't understand the power of a stubborn dreamer. With each passing moment, the signal strengthened, a testament to human ingenuity and the indomitable spirit that refused to be broken. The aliens might have underestimated them, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. In the end, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about standing up, fighting back, and proving that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, humanity would not be silenced. Not today, not ever. The console's beeping had finally settled into a dull hum, much like the last coherent thought in Jax's mind. He swiped a hand across his weary eyes, making a mental note that if they ever got out of this, he was going to sleep for a year, or at least until he forgot what an alien threat looked like. Riven leaned back in her chair, a rare hint of relaxation in her posture. Looks like they finally got the message. Can't say I blame them. Touring Mars is like getting stuck in a theme park with all the rides shut down. Yeah, with the bonus of death lurking around every corner, Jax chipped in, smirking. Think they'll name a crater after us. The Riven and Jax Memorial Hole of Heroic Idiocy. Only if they can find someone dumb enough to brave the surface and put up a sign, Riven said, her usual dry wit in full swing. The important thing is they're leaving. I guess even aliens have limits to their masochism. Or maybe they just hate our dreams that much, Jax mused, glancing at the holovid screen still frozen on a scene from some ancient Earth comedy. The laugh track was eerily comforting in its predictability, a stark contrast to the chaos they'd just survived. I mean, who knew dreams could be so universally offensive? Riven shot him a look, one eyebrow arched. Humans have been offending for centuries. We've had practice. Silas wandered over, his hair still a wild testament to Martian humidity or lack thereof. Backup systems are holding. We've got time now. Time to repair, rethink. Maybe build a coffee machine that doesn't taste like burnt regret. Jax raised an invisible glass again, this time to Silas. Here's to small victories. Long live caffeine, our real savior. Outside, the Martian landscape remained as desolate as ever, but there was a newfound sense of peace, like the calm after a particularly bad storm. In the lab, the air felt lighter, even if it still smelled like desperation and Jax's Energy X. Maybe we can actually focus on living now, Riven said, her voice softer, the tough edge momentarily dulled. Instead of just surviving. Jax nodded, stretching his arms with a yawn that threatened to dislocate his jaw. Survival's still a full-time job, but hey, at least we're not on alien extermination duty anymore. Silas grinned, leaning against a console. I'll take that over trying to explain our existence to a species that probably thinks emotions are a weird Earth disease. The three of them stood in the lab, a triumvirate of unlikely heroes in a universe that rarely cared for such things. They were alive, their world intact, and for once, the future didn't seem quite so bleak. Think the colony will hold together? Jax asked, a hint of genuine curiosity in his voice. Now that we've given them a common enemy and all. Riven considered this, tapping a finger against her console like it held the secrets to life itself. People are stubborn, but they're also adaptable. Maybe this mess taught them something about unity. Or at least about not trying to kill each other while aliens are around. Optimistic today, aren't we? Silas teased, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Next thing you'll tell me there's hope for Martian beer. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Riven shot back, her smirk returning. Miracles have their limits. Outside the lab, the first tentative signs of reconstruction were underway. People were emerging, blinking in the harsh Martian daylight, as if waking from a dream they hadn't quite believed. There was a sense of camaraderie, grudging perhaps, but they're all the same. Guess the aliens did us a favor in a way, Jax said, watching the scene unfold on a flickering monitor. Nothing like a common enemy to bring out the best in people. Or at least the least murderous, Silas nodded, his expression thoughtful. Maybe we should send them a thank you note. Thanks for the existential crisis, here's a fruit basket. Just make sure it's not one of those weird Martian fruits, Riven warned. Don't want them deciding we're trying to poison them after all. Jax chuckled, shaking his head at the absurdity of it all. So what now? We've poked the hornet's nest, sent them packing. Do we just go back to being miserable Martians? Riven shrugged, a gesture that somehow embodied 1,000 possibilities. We rebuild, we learn, and most importantly, we keep dreaming. Seems to be what we're best at. Dreaming's all well and good, but I could settle for a decent breakfast first, Jax countered, his stomach grumbling in agreement. Or at least something that doesn't taste like it was scraped off the side of a crater. Silas laughed, the sound a welcome break from the usual tension. One step at a time. Let's fix the essentials before we start redecorating. The lights in the lab finally stopped their nervous flickering, settling into a steady glow that spoke of renewed stability. It wasn't much, but it was a start. They'd face the darkness and come out the other side, a little battered, a little wiser, and with a few more stories to tell. Think the aliens will be back? Jax asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't too worried about the answer. Riven shrugged again, this time with a hint of defiance. Maybe. If they do, they'll find us ready, and hopefully with better coffee. Now there's a dream worth fighting for, Jax said, his grin matching hers. As the day wore on, Riven, Jax, and Silas began to plan and execute repairs on the battered lab. The colony, too, was adjusting, finding a new rhythm in the wake of chaos. There was a strange sort of peace in the air, one born not from the absence of danger, but from the presence of shared experience. Guess we're all in this together now, Silas remarked, watching as people worked side by side, grudges temporarily set aside for the sake of survival. Nothing like almost dying to bring people together, Jax said. You know, in a weird don't-touch-my-stuff kind of way. Riven smiled, the expression rare enough to be noteworthy. We've got something here, even if it's a mess. Maybe that's what makes it ours. The three of them stood for a moment, watching the Martian sun set over a landscape that was both unforgiving and strangely beautiful. It was a harsh world, but it was theirs, and for the first time they had a glimmer of hope that it could be more than just a place to survive. Think we'll ever get used to this? Jax asked, his voice a mix of wonder and skepticism. Probably not, Riven replied, a soft chuckle escaping her. But maybe that's the point. Keeps us on our toes or on our asses depending on the day, Silas added, earning a laugh from his companions. As the Martian night descended, the three of them turned back to their work, their spirits unbroken, their resolve unyielding. They were dreamers, fighters, survivors, and they intended to keep it that way. The next few days passed in a blur of activity and cautious optimism. The colony began to stitch itself back together, the scars of the alien threat still fresh but slowly fading. There was a sense of unity that hadn't been there before, a quiet determination that made the future seem just a little less daunting. Think we'll be telling our grandkids about this someday? Jax mused, tightening a bolt on a particularly stubborn piece of machinery. If we ever have grandkids, Riven replied, adjusting the settings on a console, or if they ever believe us. Ah, the classic I saved the world story, Silas said with a grin. Right up there with I walked uphill both ways in the Martian dust. Jax snorted. Hey, surviving on Mars without getting sand in places it shouldn't be is a victory in itself, or getting crushed by bureaucracy, Riven added. Those forms are more lethal than half the alien tech. As they worked, the lab began to take on a new life. It was still the same grimy, flickering mess it had always been, but now it felt like home, warts and all. There was a sense of purpose, a drive to make things better, no matter how small the steps. We've got a long way to go, Silas said, surveying the progress with a critical eye. But at least we're moving forward, and not backward like we usually do, Jax quipped. Progress is progress, no matter how slow. The sun rose and set, marking the passage of time in a way that felt both mundane and momentous. With each new day came new challenges, new triumphs, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing they'd made it this far together. Think the universe will give us a break now? Jax asked one evening, his gaze fixed on the stars above. Riven shrugged, her expression one of contemplation. Probably not. But that's okay. We've got this. Silas nodded in agreement, his usual grin tempered by a rare streak of sincerity. Yeah, we've got this. And so, life continued on Mars. The colony rebuilt, the people adapted, and the planet that had once seemed so unforgiving became a place they could call their own. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and for that they were grateful. As for Riven, Jax, and Silas, they remained at the heart of the colony's efforts, their bond forged in the fires of survival and strengthened by the shared determination to face whatever came next. They were dreamers, fighters, survivors, and they wouldn't have it any other way. "Here's to us," Jax said one evening, raising a makeshift glass in a toast. "To us," Riven and Silas echoed, clinking their imaginary glasses together. Outside, the Martian winds continued their eternal dance, a reminder of the challenges they faced and the victories they'd won. It was a harsh world, but it was theirs, and that was enough.